Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is November 28th. I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving. We're going to do something a little different today. We're going to throw you guys a curveball. This is Abe Greenwald, the executive editor of Commentary, and I am joined by the regular host of the Commentary Magazine Podcast, the editor of Commentary, and my boss, John Podhoretz. Hi, John.
Hi, Abe.
And I'm going to interview him.
Oh, boy.
So I want to start off with something that speaks to our politics of the moment, our mission. I think things that are on our listeners and readers' minds, and certainly what's on my mind. And I will, of course, I'm going to sneak in some questions about things I also want to know, just for my own benefit. So something you've said on several occasions, this has come up over and over again on the podcast and in articles, is that fights, political fights, ideological fights, are never settled. First, can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean when you say that the debates are never over? And second, if they are ultimately never settled, why do we keep fighting?
So it would seem to me that there are a few things in the course of my lifetime that would have seemed to have been settled and over. I guess the biggest one is that communism and socialism had failed. That was demonstrated by the collapse of the Soviet Union and by the fact that most of the world rejected socialism, meaning the leftist version of socialism, nationalization, idea that the state should own most private enterprise, should own most enterprises, should run the economy from the top down, and work to level the population into a single class. So that's Marxism or communism is that with some other more extreme elements. And it failed, and the Soviet Union collapsed, and China essentially abandoned its commitment to ideological socialism and communism in favor of some new hybrid thing. So there we had the two largest countries in the world pursuing socialism. Most of Europe, that the socialist parties in Europe in the course of the 1990s and the 2000s either lost their socialist coloration or were defeated soundly. And that all just seemed to be a reaction to reality. It was though it underwent a real world test for 70 years. The world realized that not only didn't it work, but that it caused immense and unimaginable hardship, suffering, monstrousness, cruelty, and that it was therefore done the way belief in flat Earth was done. That people used to believe the Earth was flat. It was proved it wasn't. Now only lunatics think the Earth is flat, if anybody thinks the Earth is flat. And of course, socialism is back. The mayor of New York is now a socialist. Proudly calls himself a socialist. The term socialism is viewed favorably by maybe not a plurality of Americans, but a great number of Americans. The one country in which I think it's fair to say among a lot of the democracies that never even attempted genuine socialism, didn't really have a socialist party that was ever in power. And yet here we are 35 years, 34 years after the Soviet Union literally folded up shop and ceased to exist. And we are back having to demonstrate that, or we are back in a world in which people think that its solutions, or the solutions that were pursued by the Soviets and socialist countries and communist countries, are worth trying again. So if that wasn't disproved fully and conclusively the way flat eartherism was, or let's say child sacrifice, the way that child sacrifice pursued routinely in the ancient world by ancient civilizations was not conclusively viewed by, I think, even now, as the most monstrous thing that you can possibly imagine. And yet here we are. So in that sense, nothing is ever resolved, because the people who saw the evil over time get old and wither and die, and the people leaving behind generations that never lived through it and are tempted by the same fantasies that gave rise to its power in the first place. So in that sense, no political fight is ever resolved, and therefore the conversations, the arguments have to be renewed, revitalized, new light has to be shed. And though it may seem incredibly boring to have these conversations that seem settled, particularly if you're older, you have to have them, because when you don't have them, people forget them.
As you were speaking, it occurred to me, I'm wondering if, and this could just be a product of my having come to political and ideological awareness when I did, but I want to know if what you think about this. Has the power of argument itself lost some of its oomph in political debate, as opposed to, say, personality, charisma, tribal feeling, or was it kind of always ever thus? Because to me now it feels like arguments, they need to be made, for the reasons you say and for other reasons. Just to say, just to have be on the record and say, hey, what you think, you may be in a bit of a bubble. It's not conventional wisdom. So slow down, buddy. But they don't seem to sort of penetrate the way other factors do. Was that always the case? Is it more like that now, or some other
I mean,
situation?
that's an incredibly deep question, because one could argue that argument over first things, over like philosophical concerns and all of that, was always a very elite conversation. It's not the way most people live. Most people aren't conversant with abstract ideology, or what one thing means versus what another thing means. And the course of the last 2 decades of the 20th century and the first 2 decades of the 21st century have so democratized our conversation that conversations that used to take place pretty much at the elite level, in the pages of small magazines like Commentary, in books that were read by 25 to 50,000 people, that kind of thing. This was something that was viewed as extraordinarily important by the people who conducted it, and there were relatively few venues for these kinds of conversations, and so they were argued there. Campuses where they're, think about like the Ivy Leagues. I mean, if you actually total up the number of people in the Ivy Leagues when I was a student, they're larger than they are now, but you're talking about 7 schools or something like that, 80,000 people, maybe 85,000 people out of an entire nation, where these kinds of fights, the people who would have them, all that, were sort of all congregated, living, taking place. And now, of course, everybody on earth can pop up on social media and make an argument. And the only times that we ever heard from the mass of people, there were 2 times. One was polling, and the other were elections. So it could come often as an extraordinary shock to people in these elites when it turned out that, say, Ronald Reagan and the views that he held were vastly more popular than anybody in the elite precincts of universities could ever have imagined, that he would win 40 states in 1980, that he would win an outright majority of the vote in 1980 with three candidates in the race, when the polling in the last weekend suggested that he and Jimmy Carter were tied. Suddenly, the voice of the people is heard. It's unassailable. It's the only time everybody gets together and says, this is how we feel. And then politics shifts to take account of this. And now we have plebiscites every 10 minutes. I mean, literally every 10 minutes. As we're talking, there was a piece that somebody wrote on his Substack that I think the Free Press picked up, that makes a transparently preposterous argument, which is that we have misunderstood poverty and food because somebody miscalculated what it meant to be able to have enough money to feed yourself. And that number was set in 1963, and it was set wrongly. And in fact, if you figure out where that is, the truth is that everybody in America who does not make $100,000 to $140,000 a year is poor. And this piece comes out, it kind of goes viral because it seems to offer a ready explanation. It's all a mistake. The understanding of how much people need to live is a terrible mistake. It's been a mistake for 60 years. Things were miscalculated. So I'm not an economist, so I contact a friend of mine who's sort of both in finance and as a thinker about finance, and I'm like, could this be true? And he's like, I mean, it can't really, I'm pretty sure it can't be true, but I need to go through his numbers and figure it out. I'm going to go ask my friend at a think tank, and my friend at a think tank says, no, it's not true. He made some mathematical error here and that, blah, blah. And so for 2 days now, there's been a kind of argument about whether or not you're poor if you don't make $100,000 to $140,000 a year. And now everybody is attacking this guy whose name is Green. Matt Iglesias is on the left, people are on the right, and we'll forget about it. But the point is that for 48 hours, suddenly, there's floated this idea that everybody in America is actually poor. And that's the truth. And the truth is that we're all poor, and most people are poor, and that's life. So that never would have happened in a previous era before, somebody's like, interesting but dumb idea that was said in a dorm room at 1:00 in the morning, and then you had an argument about it, and then you all went to bed and you forgot about it the next morning, somehow is amplified on social media. People pick it up, people go, that's interesting, and then it's sort of like all over the place, and then we have like a 2-day news cycle that about a stupid idea like that. Like that wouldn't have happened before. On the other hand, sometimes the news and important stories have been suppressed over time by when the gatekeepers were so powerful and there were so few venues to discuss things and discuss unconventional ideas and that. And so the fact now is that anything can sort of emerge from this, giant lake in which we're all swimming. And that's also a good, because that means it's very hard to suppress things that used to be suppressed. But I don't know that argument has died out. It's more like,
I didn't mean died. I just mean
right. Yeah. But it's more like so then who succeeds in this world is the the people who can get amplified the best. And on the other hand, will any of it endure? I don't think so. I mean, I think the noise makers emerge, and then it's sort of like a Western movie, and then come along, which is what's sort of happening with the podcast Bro Right. Like then a gunslinger comes into town who's like, I'm gonna take you on, scariest guy in the West. Let's go duel in the street, and I'll shoot you in the head, and then I'll be the top guy. And so that's Tucker establishes the furthest right position, and then Nick Fuentes comes on and goes to his right, and Candace Owens goes to his right, and so that in theory that process can be never ending. All that will happen is that each of them is a corpse in the other's wake eventually. So
sort of, I mean, among the things I mentioned that may threaten to sort of overtake the power of
Mhm.
argument is sensation.
Right.
Yeah, and I
Right.
guess that
Well,
probably.
it's like pornography and art, right? Like what people, it's all conversation from the 18th century onward. Like Diderot, the French philosopher, was a pornographer. He actually wrote pornography and was jailed several times for both having, like wrong-headed ideas and for being a pornographer. And I bring that up only to say that there's always been art and sensation, right? So art is an effort to explore things, and pornography is an effort to basically stimulate your basest or your most animalistic impulses, and they coexist, and they're and they it's a fight forever. It's like the id and the ego or whatever. And so does sensation have the upper hand? Yeah, sure it
Yeah,
does. I mean, look at the president of the United States. I mean,
right.
that's he's a creature of sensation. And so that's but just like no argument has ever won, the battle between those two is never what you think it is. You think like, well, if you start crumbling into sensation, you'll never climb back out into a world of greater sensibility.
It's great that you say that, because I had there's a my next question
Yeah.
before I got sidetracked by my follow up there was is about, it has to do with both of the first questions, which is, so if there is this cyclical nature to the fights and the sides and the in some sense that seems dispiriting. We have to have these fights again, but is there not silver lining there, in the sense that Mark Twain often quoted as saying, "History doesn't repeat; it rhymes." Can we expect? I don't know when, a because right now it feels as if we're headed for an endless ramping up. It feels as if things are getting crazier, more extreme. Everyone's going to everyone's right flank and everyone's left flank, and everyone's going to. That may be just a feeling, right? I mean, can we expect, if the old fights come up again and again and again, does that mean there's reason to think that there would be a pre-Trump? You can never go back. We know you
Yeah.
can't go back,
Right.
but a right that rhymes with a pre-Trump right, a liberalism that rhymes with a pre-2020 liberalism. Um, that should happen too at some point.
I mean, it should. If you think about the last 120 years, right? When did Yeats write The Second Coming, right? The Second Coming is basically the greatest
Oh,
poem of the 20th century, and it is about how civilization is collapsing, right? The World War One, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Everywhere the blood Tim died is loosed. And it ends with the famous lines like, "What rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Jerusalem to be born, or such toward Bethlehem to be born." What is that? That's there. Surely there will be a second coming. Like, it's not gonna. We're not ending here. And that was the First World War. That was after the First World War, and we didn't even know what horrors. We didn't know, we weren't alive, but Yeats didn't know what horrors were to come. The First World War was nothing compared to the Second World War. But the idea that civilization is going to end, and that something, but that means that it will be replaced by something else. uh the rough beast, our come, is that rough beast evil, or is that rough beast simply unformed and good? Is it the second coming of Christ? Is it the second coming of evil? We don't know. But the idea, I only, not to be pretentious about it, but it's like, obviously in every generation people think that the world is coming to an end in some fashion or other, that the culture is going to collapse, and everything is going to be destroyed. And there are these periods in history where things go haywire, and then uh, reformation occurs, or there's some advance that changes the dynamic. And or looked even further back, a lot of the things that have happened are all examples that you can't see until it happens of a gigantic civilizational change. Like the industrial, the first 40 years of the Industrial Revolution were a horror show, monstrous. The countrysides in England were emptied out. Children are working in factories 14 hours a day. People are getting killed in industrial accidents. There are no rules. It's like a nightmare. It's the dark satanic mills that William Blake wrote about, and all of that. And then, but it turns out, pulled back, this was the beginning of the greatest progress humankind had ever known. Economic progress, scientific progress, medical progress, all of that. But the opening gambit was nightmarish, and it could be that everything we talk about smartphones and AI and all that, and everything that's so terrifying about that, viewed from 2100, it'll be like, well, that was all part of the growing pains of the third industrial age or something like that. Right. That's what I'm not going to live to see that. I don't know if I'm right about that. Mm-hmm. Obviously, AI could destroy everything, or it could fix everything, or it's just another tool. I don't know. But that's why arguments never end also, which is like the terms, the bases change. If you haven't, this is like what we do for a living. So we publish articles in a magazine. So 50 years ago, you commissioned an article for a magazine, and 2 months later, somebody sent you a typescript of the article, and they had to put it in the mail, and they mailed it to you, and it took 5 days for it to get to you. And then you had to edit it, and then you had to retype it, and then you had to send it back to them for comment, and then they would send you back a version and all of this. And so the article on whatever was happening in the world came out 3 months after the event that it was being written about. And that was fine, because that's how the pace was for mm-hmm. everybody. Mm-hmm. And now all of that can happen in 7 minutes.
Mm-hmm. But that also, I think, pushed, say, monthlies like mm-hmm. us to be less news cycly. Right. Because there was no.
It was never that it was news cycle, but like news analysis was very basic in some sense. If you were writing a news analysis of the SALT talks or détente or something like that, and you were summarizing a development in 1972, and it took 4 months for the article summarizing the development to come out, everything else was going on that pace also. So it's not like they were going to make the SALT II treaty, it was going to pass, and then the world was going to change. Everything moved at that pace. So did analysis, and so did comment, and so did controversy. And now, as I say, everything is instantaneous, and it becomes much harder to keep your wits about you, because, it's like,
you have Trump, the most important man in the world, operates at a speed faster than the news cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the news cycle and everything, it's more like, it's like you're standing somewhere, and it turns out you're a thing in a shooting gallery. You're like one of those things that goes across someone, and you have to keep yourself from getting shot. All these things are flying by your head. What should you pay attention to? What shouldn't you pay attention to? But I think, like, talking about what it means to be human, which is ultimately what all this is about, obviously it's a much different conversation in 2025 than it was in 1955, when people were still recovering from, having fought the bloodiest and most destructive war in human history, and what was going to come out of that. We look back and we think, oh, how idyllic. Oh, look, here in America, one couple family, they had a house, and they could this, and they were having children, and they were living in newly built suburbs, and there was solidarity, and it was so amazing. What an amazing thing. And of course, like 5 million Americans had been in battle and had come home with scars and wounds, and having seen things that no human being should ever see, and had been tested as no one had ever been tested, and there were all kinds of social dislocations that came out of that, and we sort of forget that stuff while we're thinking, oh, if we could only go back to that time. And now our lives are so terrible because we now they could own homes and we couldn't own a home. And then it's like, do you know what those people went through? They lived through the Depression, and then they went off to war, and they were like on a battlefield for 3 years, and then they came back. It's like they were just licking their wounds.
And so much of that data is manipulated. Like,
Yeah,
when they talk about owning homes, what the sizes of the homes, the
yeah,
prices of the home,
yeah.
it's all.
Levittown home was 700 square feet,
Yeah.
2 bedrooms, 1 porch, living room, dining room, 1 bathroom. And then suddenly someone's got a family of 4 living in, with
Right.
each person having 100 square feet. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, it's just we're constantly fantasizing that what we're going through, no one else has ever gone through, and it's the worst ever. And there's stuff where it's things are pretty bad. I'm not saying that it's not.
Well,
not
that's a good segue into my next question. Picking up on Yates and Rough Beast and the center not holding. When I first got to commentary, I was made to understand that we do not counsel despair, which was very valuable for me because I am by nature more pessimistic than most. And I have no doubt sometimes unwisely. But I have to, certainly in the past 2 years, this idea has been tested within me, and I think sort of generally, and I'm wondering, is there a time when it is more effective and moral to sort of sound the alarm and say, look, this is it. We're in big trouble. Now, I don't mean, obviously, when we're on the very precipice of a disaster, of course, you have an obligation. But I mean, in a sort of 50-50 situation, things could go this way or they could go this way, where the fallback of the happy warrior would be to say, we're going to get through this because we've gotten through other things before, but and I don't know the answer, might there not be more efficacy in saying, no, you don't understand. This is by my lights, this is going to go very, very bad. And you need to be awake and scared and motivated. And I'm thinking of,
Right.
of the Flight 93 election essay.
Right.
And whatever you think of its arguments and whatever you think of Michael Anton, its resonance was undeniable. And so, yeah, is it always right in a sort of roughly 50-50 situation, not to counsel despair? And I struggle with this.
I mean, you should be angry when things are going wrong and bad things are happening, and bad things are happening to people or bad things are happening in the world that you're seeing. Injustices are popping up all over the place. People are defaming our cops or our military. They're defaming Israel. They're defaming the West. Ken Burns makes a documentary about the American Revolution in which he says that the Declaration of Independence was cribbed from the Iroquois Confederacy, and therefore, they which is a preposterous claim that is obviously designed merely to sort of remove Western civilizational efficacy from the greatest triumph of human politicking ever. Should that make you angry? Yes, like all that should make you angry, and it should stimulate your argumentative side, or it should stimulate our argumentative side. Despair is a form of giving up. Like, it's like, I don't even know. I don't even want to talk about this because, it's all over anyway, and that things happen that are very surprising. This is not like meliorism or like happy talk. I mean, would we have expected in 2015 or something like that the blowback against the trans revolution would be as widespread and effective and serious as it has become? I certainly didn't. I sort of, you end up very hard to imagine things not sort of moving in a straight line, and that it's just everyone is going to eventually come to accept this, and we're going to be living in a world in which people are cutting things off their children and all of that. We started talking about this years and years and years ago, you and I, because we know somebody who announced on Facebook, somebody that we both dated actually, that her 4-year-old son was a girl, and we watched as she became the mother, not the son, became a sort of celebrity of openness, and she giving speeches places and all of this. And she'd been an actress and she'd been a writer, like she'd failed at all kinds of things, a person with a lot of money. And suddenly she found herself as a heroine in her own drama, using her child as her weapon. And it was one of the most evil things I've practically ever seen. And it did almost fill me with despair, in the sense that I didn't understand how we were going to develop antibodies against this. And I was wrong. Like, civilization, or just simply human nature, was just too strong, not for ordinary people. Again, the ordinary people who aren't mostly heard of were going, no, that boy is not going into my daughter's locker room. He's a boy. I don't care whether he's wearing a skirt or not.
Mm-hmm.
And he's wearing a skirt maybe because he wants to ogle my daughter, and it's all a fake, and he's a pervert. And he's not coming into this bathroom. I don't care how he feels. What about my daughter? So even there, that moment that you and I had of high despair about our civilization, like the survival of the human species, we overreacted to. But I don't think we were wrong to react, because
Right.
you really didn't know how this was going to go.
Right. Which is why I think it's important not to counsel despair, because when you're in those moments, you can't imagine the bounce back, the sort of boomerang that's going to happen. And then when it happens, you're like sort of dumbstruck.
Yeah, I mean, it's like depression in general. Like, if
Mm,
I don't suffer from clinical depression, but I know people who do, and obviously depression is a cyclical thing. It's people, have come in out of it and stuff like that. And when people are in the depths of it, they cannot, sort of like pain. Like, if you're really, really, really sick, or something really hurt you, I used to have this with strep throat. I used to get really, really bad cases of strep throat, which of course doesn't last that long. It can last a week, but it's about as painful as anything or kidney stones, which I've also had. And you're like, I will never feel good again. I don't remember what it felt like not to be in pain.
mm-hmm,
I have
mm-hmm.
no memory of it. And then, of course, you wake up, you emerge like human, whatever, you get better, or your kidney stone passes, or the depression, your body chemistry equalizes itself. But it's at those deepest moments that people who have bad impulse control can do the worst possible thing to themselves, simply to escape that pain or that despair. So at least if you think, oh my God, well, there's a fight to be waged, that at least gives you a purpose in your, when you're low. It gives you a
Right.
sense of, like, purpose, destiny, something you need to do to save yourself, or save other people, or save your children, or whatever, that can keep you going.
I mean, it's the Viktor Frankl thing,
Yeah.
and it's someone with a why can achieve any how, or whatever. I'm
Yeah,
mangling it, but
exactly. Yeah.
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 Um,
Remember, he says that's not even a moral thing. Like,
no,
Frankl says, the people that didn't survive the Holocaust, chances are they were morally superior to those of us who did. Like, this is not a judgment of who was good. Like, some of us did what we had to do to survive. And the people who were unable to do that should not be judged. Maybe they were better than we were and simply couldn't do what was necessary to be done. But a purposeful existence can get you through things that believing your existence has no purpose can't.
Right. Well, this is a good opportunity to move on to Israel. There's a lot of criticism. Well, we know that there's a lot of criticism about Israel. But I'm talking in particular about the not the crazy criticism, but the criticism about Israel lacking a successful messaging strategy or any messaging strategy, and that it's lost the so-called information war. I know, for example, contributing editor Jonathan Schanzer believes that. Do you think there was a real missed opportunity on Israel's part throughout this war to communicate and in some way that would have had a significant impact on the Western public, on the American public, or that more or less the war, so insanely scrutinized, so wildly distorted, and brutal, necessarily brutal, was going to turn people off no matter what?
I'm pretty much with you on the second. I mean, I look back and I don't see what on earth Israel could have done that the information battlefield, as we now understand it, was set up, was in place, not just the Hamas spending 10 years digging the tunnels to help fight the war, but sort of the 10 or 20 years spent digging the tunnels of inside American public opinion that, created this, people popping up out of nowhere by the thousands or hundreds of thousands to protest this and do that and do this on campus and do that on campus, all of which was part of a coordinated long-term strategy that began with funding certain types of professorships and departments and universities that began at the really right after 9/11 as some kind of effort to figure out how the Islamic world could protect itself against American rage after 9/11. Were there things that could be done to ameliorate the public relations disaster that the hijackers and Al-Qaeda had done to them? And one of the ways they did it was by spreading money around in elite circles, and it was wildly successful. And Israel didn't do that because it was busy doing other things. So what's amazing is that under other circumstances, in other at other times, that kind of blowback to Israel would have panicked the Israeli government, would have forced it almost unilaterally to concede in some fashion or kind of lose the war that it was fighting rather than lose Western public opinion. And simple fact of the matter is, even if Bibi Netanyahu had wanted to do that, he could not, because Israel is not gutter. It's a country with a vibrant democracy and free press and public, and he head of a fractious coalition and all of that. And he could not cede to Biden. He could not give up the fight. The country would not have allowed it. And so Israel made a kind of conscious, deliberate decision that it was going to have to suffer the slings and arrows of Western public opinion to do what it had to do. And in fact, even the people who loathe Bibi and hate everything he does and want to blame him for everything, had he done otherwise, they would have come at him from the right and said that he had chickened out, that he wasn't protecting that he hadn't protected the country before October 7th, and he wasn't protecting it now, and he was just trying to save his own skin, blah, 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 blah. So as we kept saying on the podcast, you and I, throughout this entire battle, Israel's only hope rested in victory and seeing what victory was going to bring,
Yeah,
because we already knew what defeat would bring.
and and to me, the joke of this line of argument, and that's not a joke, and there are serious people who say it, but the irony of this line of argument is that, in the past, whenever Israel tried to launch a friendly PR campaign for anything, everything was labeled as Hasbara, pink washing, this washing, that washing, So now people are saying, where was the washing?
Yeah.
Where was the,
Yeah. Well, look, there are certain things that are said about Israel that are so manifestly, insanely untrue that if you know anything about it, it's like almost impossible.
Right.
Talk about counseling despair. Like, it's a white colonial settler, it's a white colonialism. So, walk down a street in Israel as opposed to walking down a street almost anywhere else on earth. And it just so happens, because Jews were scattered across the globe, and there were Jews there were Ashkenazim up in Europe, and there were Sephardim and Mizrahim around the Middle East, and around the Indian Ocean and places like that, and there were Ethiopians, and there were there were Jews of all kinds, and you walk in Israel, and it is the most, in terms of skin tone, variegated country I have ever seen. I mean, I haven't been to India, so maybe India is similar, but I mean, it is not white. It is many things, but it is not white. It's brown, it's tan, it's blonde, it's jet black, and so when people use this argument about Israel being a kind of white colonial settler nation, and you have spent more than 3 hours on a street in Tel Aviv, you're like, what? I don't even have a vocabulary in which to tell you how preposterous you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the Hasbara stuff is like, hey, come to Tel Aviv, we have great beaches, and they do, and the beaches in Tel Aviv are, but that's not what's amazing about Israel. Like, you should go. Tel Aviv is a fantastic city, but it is the world's most astounding mix of insanely ancient places that are central to the entire planet's story, and this entirely new country that has emerged over about 120 years, and they're coexisting side by side, as are extraordinarily religious Jews who live in a very hermetic kind of bubble, and highly cosmopolitan people who don't have any religion at all, and all of that. It's like, and it's all crammed into a space the size of, the 1967 borders were about the size of Rhode Island. So, imagine Rhode Island with, the most variegated culture that you can imagine. And of course, then 20% of the population being non-Jewish and Arab and Druze. It's so, could you tell that story? You can. Nobody seems to want to hear it, because the people who are arguing against it, they don't care what's true or false about it. They just want Israel to fall into the sea.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a case where argument is is kind of pointless.
Well, I mean, it's not pointless in the sense that, like, there's this whole idea. There's a whole idea, like, if you could somehow schlep everybody in America to Israel, get them on a plane and go to Israel for a week, which is what's been going on with politicians for like 40 years. Just bring them to Israel. They'll meet people. They'll go to the beaches. They'll go to Yad Vashem. They'll do this. And, when they leave, they'll know this is a formidable place that shouldn't be so easily dismissed. And that's been very successful. The problem is, that you can't do that with 300 million Americans.
Right. Yeah. Well, inculcating an experience is a different.
Yeah.
Is effective. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have time for two, I think, quick questions?
Yeah.
All right. Going back to fights that never end, arguments. Is there any major issue on which you've changed your position dramatically in, let's say, the last 10 years? You can think about it for a second.
The only issue that I feel like the sorts of things that I said in 2015, I would not say in 2025, relates to immigration. So I'm very dovish on immigration based on my own Jewish experience and the knowledge that the immigration laws of 1924 that, sort of brought up basically built a wall to prevent large scale further Jewish immigration to the United States, had the inadvertent effect of a million more people would have been alive that were murdered during World War II had circumstances been different. And that with that knowledge and my own feeling about it, that I was in no position to say that immigration law should not be as liberal as possible. And I don't think my view was all that controversial, actually, even on the right. Like, politicians from the early 90s onward were pushing tough on immigration lines, and they were not successful. Pete Wilson in California, there are various, like, it was not a winning message. And in Texas, which had the longest border with Mexico, Texas was very liberal and happy, seemed to have a very comparable. And then whatever happened, very complicated set of circumstances beginning really around 2014, when this just massive flow started coming over the border during Obama's second term, and that the border patrol was overwhelmed. The ability to police the border became impossible, and our system was apparently incapable of dealing with an inadvertent set of incentives that were overwhelming us. And add to that some other deeply uncomfortable things I had to admit, like when we let in 250,000 Somalis because of the war in 1994, and Bill Clinton, in humanitarian terms, said these people had a reasonable fear of persecution and should come into the United States. We then imported the wholesale this population largely into Minnesota that is clearly hostile to the American experiment and is not being, I don't know, matured into becoming part of the American experiment. And Ilhan Omar is there as one end result of this, and that's really bad. And so some of the things that I believed were good, like the idea that we were a refuge nation for people who were, under threat of genocide or whatever, has had knock-on consequences that I did not anticipate.
Yeah, I've tempered my enthusiasm along similar lines. Okay, finally we're going to end on a moment of high culture.
Okay,
John, you famously say the greatest show ever is The Odd Couple.
Yes.
Why? For see, I just want to say, I remember The Odd Couple, to me, like, Channel 11 was the Odd Couple channel growing up. It was sort of always on, and it was a comfort to me.
Yes.
But I never got into it the way you did.
Well, okay, so the only other person I know who holds this view unambiguous, there are two: Cliff Asness, our 2025 commentary roastee, and Jonah Goldberg. And we all grew up in the sort of New York metropolitan area, as you did. And yes, so The Odd Couple was on for 5 years. It wasn't particularly successful as a network sitcom, but then when it went into syndication, and it is one of the most New York shows ever, and it went into syndication, and it was a big success in syndication, but nowhere was it as big a success in syndication as it was in New York City. And it did float this like one major television station, which showed it 4 times a day for 20 years. And so, I don't know if it's the best. It's my favorite. I don't think it's the best. I'm sure there are many things that are better, but it is it in some ways it's the last. It was the final gasp of a certain type of Jewish humor that doesn't really exist anymore, which is sardonic, kind of one very hopeful, hysterical, ridiculous person, and one bitter, pessimistic voice of reason, and they're both incredibly comic figures, each of them wrong in their own way about everything on earth, and locked in this battle together, living in this one apartment. And so
Yeah, they're almost
look,
like
let me ask you now. I'm going to
yeah.
ask you a question, because you and my son, who is
Mhm.
15, have been having the same experience over the last couple of months, which
Mm.
is you've both been watching The Twilight Zone,
Yeah.
you rewatching it, him watching it for the first time, and you was like you said it was your comfort food over the last couple of months. So what is it about The Twilight Zone that was so compelling? The first Twilight Zone, the 5 seasons, 100 episodes or something, 120 episodes. What is it about The Twilight Zone that made you compulsively watch it?
What I love about the Twilight Zone at its best is that, to me, Serling sort of blended sci-fi ideas, and this isn't really talked about a lot, but almost sort of crime fiction dialogue and settings. There's a lot of that, you know. There's sort of gangsters going through time, and thieves getting their comeuppance in the next world, and all that stuff. And so it makes sense that these two pulpy genres at the time were sort of blended in this. I mean, it's sci-fi. It's not a crime
Yeah,
show,
yeah,
but he took the mood. It's the mood of crime fiction often, and it actually makes for a really wonderful blend. There are also whimsical episodes and sentimental episodes and purely comic episodes and some very brilliant, inventive episodes and using Buster Keaton in silent movies, and they it was very experimental,
hmm
which I also appreciate. Um, but also, I have to say, at the end of the day, what they thought their most daring shows look so innocent now,
yeah.
you know?
So I've been watching a little bit with my son, who was only in the first season, and he's a completist, so he'll watch the whole thing. And what I what I have found striking, what I always thought was that it had a very Rod Serling, a Jew from upstate New York, had a very Old Testament moral quality. In other words, it was like to me, Twilight Zone morality was: you're a guy, you're in a hurry, you park in a handicapped parking space, and at the end of the 22 minutes, you will be in a wheelchair for having. This is an episode I wrote in my own head, but like that's the world of Rod Serling.
There's a lot
You
of
you
comeuppance.
have
Yeah.
you have a sin, you indulge in it, and the universe comes down on your head. And
Hmm.
for a kid, when I was a kid, I found this immensely compelling, because it was like it could be brutal and it could be heartrending or something, but it always seemed fair. It was like nobody ever really didn't get what they deserved somehow. I mean, some of
Yeah.
the really dark episodes are, the one that I watched the other day, which was so striking to me, as I told you, is called Not Enough Time, or Time, and I can't remember what it's. And it's Burgess Meredith is this henpecked husband, a dreamer, and all he wants to do is read. And then he's a bank teller. He goes into the vault to read at lunchtime, and the vault shakes, and he comes out, and the entire world has been destroyed, obviously in a thermonuclear blast. And he doesn't know what to do with himself. And then he comes upon the public library, and he realizes this is actually a paradise for him, because he can spend the rest of his life without being henpecked and without being yelled at by his boss, just reading. Just read and read and read. But he has these very thick glasses, sets up all the books he's going to read over the next year, and everything is destroyed, and he is about to get ready to start sitting down and reading, and his glasses fall off his head and shatter, and he cannot see a thing. And then he sits down and bursts into tears, and that's the end of the show. Why does he get it? Because he's happy that everybody was killed, because now they're all out of his way, and he can just indulge himself in his own sybaritic pleasures, and he deserves what happened to him.
Right.
When I was a kid, it was sort of horrifying, that episode, but like it's brilliant. Like,
no, there is a biblical logic to it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Interestingly enough, because I've just seen them all.
Yeah.
He appeared in a later episode as a librarian, who in an episode called "The Obsolete Man," who is a librarian in the future who has to make the case to the state as to why he shouldn't be put down as obsolete.
Right. Anyway, it was obviously the thing about the Twilight Zone was it was an anthology series, and did not have to follow. It wasn't like a sitcom or an ordinary television show where you followed the same characters over many years. And I was struck watching this. I had this flash of revelation about why the short story has gone the way of all flesh. Like, basically, half these things on the Twilight Zone were based on short stories published in magazines like Astounding and other places, and Collier's. And most famous episode was this occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, which is a French, which was actually made in France and won an Oscar, and then was put on this short story about a guy who escapes the noose and comes home to his family and has a wonderful moment. And it turns out that everything you're seeing is the fantasy that he has as he's being hanged, in the second between the moment that the panel opens up before his feet and he lands and dies of hanging. And I was thinking about how the short story was so popular in the first half, 2/3 of the 20th century. Like, all magazines published them. They were hugely popular. Writers got paid a lot of money for short stories. Playboy published short stories. The New Yorker, Saturday Evening Post, everybody. This was like a real rich thing. And what was it about them that made them? And like, writers like John Cheever became famous for being short story writers, and Shirley Jackson, and all this. It was that rather than being kind of slices of life that went nowhere, which is what the stories that I grew up reading as a kid, like Ann Beatty and other writers like that, these were concentrated, plotted things about a single thing that happened in a single person's life, and they end with a bang. Like, a classic short story that you can remember ends with like oh my God, like a kind of shock M. Night Shyamalan, surprise ending. Even if it's a literary short story, they all have to come to a point and hit the theme in the last sentence. And therefore they were more exciting than novels. They were more exciting than, than a radio show. They got you and they nailed you. And then the fashion changed, and the Iowa Writers Project writers all started writing, ex-hippies who were depressed, smoking dope, and then they sat around. They were like, why didn't we ever get married? I don't know. Here, have another hit of my joint, and then the story would end. And those stories dominated, and then it was like, well, I don't need to read that anymore. But like, it was like addictive, like the
Yeah.
way Twilight Zone is addictive, and the world of the American fiction writer killed the golden goose.
Right.
So, which you can see on the Twilight Zone, which still is like the last, is a thing you can watch that reminds you of that world.
Yeah. Toward its end, it kind of lost its way too. But yeah.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
all
Yeah. Sure.
shows
Yeah.
have their own
Yeah.
lives. All
Well,
right, so we have recommendations here. You can watch The Twilight Zone. You can read Yates. You can watch
read
The
Ambrose
Odd
Bierce.
Couple. You can read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor
That's right.
Frankl.
Yeah.
lot, lot of commentary recommends on this
Yeah.
one.
Have a feast.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, John, for letting me do
Thanks,
this.
Abe.
It was a pleasure.
Okay.
And for you and for all our absent co-panelists, keep the candle burning.